Ladies and gentlemen, here we are again. I hope most of you have recovered from last night's excesses better than I have. It was quite a night, particularly the banquet, as those of you who missed it will be able to see, I hope, on YouTube eventually. But Bernard Cornwell as Rochester, please do watch it. It's very funny. This morning's first panel discussion is about the many faces of historical fiction. Because in many ways, I'd like to call it a supra-genre, not a sub-genre. Leading the panel for us is Sarah Dunand, whose own historical novels set in Renaissance Italy particularly draw on the latest academic research about the lives of women of that time. Sarah, as I'm sure you know, is also a prolific journalist, teacher, television and radio producer and presenter, and was a vice patron founder of the Orange Prize for Fiction. She also did a fantastic preview reading from her new novel for us last night, which anyone who's there will have enjoyed very much. Ladies and gentlemen, The Many Faces of Historical Fiction.
Hello, good morning. Well done for getting up this early. We don't have very long, so I'm going to chair like Attila the Hun here in order that you guys get to come in, because I know that you're quite a vociferous audience. So everybody here, Heather, Kathy, Rory, Venora, and Carol are going to speak for about 5 minutes. And if they speak for much longer, I'm going to do something to them physically. And then we're going to throw it open to the floor for a bigger discussion, okay? And I'm going to kick it off, right? Historical fiction, what does it embrace and where is it going? I have a platform here, which is that I think that historical fiction is on the cusp of and going through a revolution, the like of which we really haven't seen in this genre, probably for as long as it has existed. And that is because history itself has been going through a revolution. And in case you've missed it, it hasn't got a great deal to do with kings and queens anymore. The historical revolution which has taken place thanks to intellectual movements like Marxism and feminism and gender studies and race studies has been asking different questions about history. It's basically been asking, who are all the people that made up history who were not the movers and shakers? And as a result of that information coming in through the hard work of scholars, novelists now have a vast, more powerful and colourful palette to play from when they look into the past. If you like, it's the final statement of democracy. It's not necessarily that you have to imagine yourself as Anne Boleyn. You can be somebody much more humble and have a life which has meaning and interest and substance within it, right? That's my first point. The second point is, if you're going to do it well and imaginatively and open this up, you have to get your history right. You have to follow the historians and their research, because quite frankly, they know stuff that you don't, except they don't know how to make a story out of it, right? So what they have done is they have gone into the mines and they have chipped away at the seam to find the gold, and then it's in an academic journal somewhere. And you now have the ability to turn it into brilliance. And I'm going to give you one example of that. In The Birth of Venus in Florence, I wanted to create a gay character. I knew there was some kind of gay underclass there. I found a book which was the PhD thesis of a gay American academic who had studied for years the journals of the night police, literally their name, who went into the dark alleys in Florence and looked at the sin that was going on in there. As a result of extremely dry court records, what they told you was that there was a thriving gay subculture going on in Florence. It told you who they were, it told you how it was policed, it told you how politics and power came together. He could never write a book because he was an academic. I could take from that book and create a character that was living and breathing because I knew it was right. We don't live when they lived. We need help to enter who they are, and the historians are doing it for us. And my third point is, if we do this correctly, we are part of a huge project where we are basically like pointillist painters, and each dot that we put on the canvas is showing a richer, deeper version of history and the past. And we're doing it in a way that history teachers are not allowed to do it. We're doing it through the imagination. So those of you who are American don't know who Michael Gove is, but he's an education secretary in Britain. And I throw out the challenge to your own administrations everywhere, which is history needs to become vital for us to understand the present and the future, and it's in your hands, but the only way it can be done is if you've done your work too. That's my 5 minutes. I'd now like to hand on to Heather.
It's a little bit unfair to have to speak after Sarah. Anyway, so my name is Heather Lazar. I am a senior editor at Touchstone, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster in the US. We publish such authors as Philippa Gregory. I work with Michelle Moran, wonderful novelist named Nancy Beaulieu. I've also reissued over 30 books by a little lady named Jean Plady. And I think so much of what Sarah had to say is just, it's inspiring to me, because on the editorial side, one of the points I want to make is I get so many questions from authors about, well, what should I write? What's the next marquee name? Who's the next Anne Boleyn? What's the next Tudors? What's the next Borgias? And to me, it's so exciting that you can take these little-known figures, or you don't even have to take a little-known figure. You can just take a time period and write about it. And I think that one of my main point really is write what's in your heart. Don't write because you're writing to a genre, I think, or because you're writing to a particular time period. If you love the Tudors, why don't you look for something else within them, not just Henry VIII's story? Was there a handmaiden? Was there, this gay subculture, I think, is so fascinating. So I think you can certainly my point is, you don't have to find that marquee name. And I think for at least 10 years, it's been, okay, it has to be the big name, and that's how publishers are going to be able to find that nonfiction hook to market the book. And I think we're seeing a shift in the US right now where that particular portion of the market is so saturated. I mean, we're running out of queens. Let's be honest. And so I think that, you find these little details and just go after them. But don't write to something because you think it's a trend. I think that that's a really dangerous way to go. Write to what you love and what you're genuinely interested in, because honestly, if you're all here, you're probably a few years into a novel or a few months into a novel, and you're going to be spending a lot of time with it. And when you're finished writing, you're really not finished writing, because the editorial process, once it comes to a publisher, I do 5, 6, 8 rounds with an author. We're constantly making the story better and stronger. And so you have to love that story. If you've just decided to write about Anne Boleyn because she's sort of interesting, you're going to get so sick of her. So my first point is write to what you love and what you think is important. Don't write to a trend. Secondly, I just wanted to touch on ebooks and say that I think it's really exciting right now. We're actually seeing a huge upsurge in the historical market for ebooks. Even, like I said, Jean Plady, she's an ebook, and she's selling remarkably well. And it's really exciting to see a resurgence for a novelist like that on devices, on the subway, and it's great. So I think that there's one last point I want to make, and it's about sort of book publishing in general, not just necessarily historical fiction. But because you're historical novelists, you are likely either the expert in your field on what you're writing, or you're an amateur expert on it, or at least you should be, because I think that you should know everything about the particular time period in which you're writing, and use that as part of your platform. We talk in publishing a lot about building your platform, and it's sort of like, well, what does that mean? This is having a blog, this is having your Facebook page, this is having Twitter. These are not all necessarily essential, but it is really important that you are available and engaged. Start building your readership even before you've finished your novel. Start meeting other people. I know it's frightening, but remember that I am an editor, and this is the kind of advice that I give. I think that it's just really important to start engaging your audience early on, and especially because if you know more about this period than anyone else, become that expert and let people come to you, and that way that legitimizes a lot of your research, especially when you're writing fiction. So anyway, I will wrap it up.
Thank you,
Sarah's
Heather.
looking at me
Now,
like
look,
she might
I've got my
dive
own
over the
order
table.
wrong because I was going people, so I'm afraid it's Venora.
Okay, that's fine.
Go for it.
Hello. So what I was going to talk about...
Who
which
are
I'm-
you?
Oh, sorry.
Tell
I'm
them.
Venora. I'm Venora Bennett, and I write historical fiction. And so as a writer, the thing that I've been very interested about in what Sarah and the others we've been talking about together is the effect of the most modern kinds of media on our way of understanding and, if I can be allowed to use those quote marks, consuming history. And I'm thinking here about the way we look at Facebook, in which all our most incompatible friends and bits of our past and present all seem to be there at the same time on the same screen. And of the electronic games my children play, in which they get introduced to characters from the past in a very strange and playful way. My 10-year-old who plays Assassin's Creed seems to know all about Machiavelli, which I have to say totally astonishes me. And even the kind of commentaries that we read about political news and financial markets, we read about strategies being stories and narratives. And so facts have become just building blocks which fit flexibly into this whole sort of world of points and stories. And I think that encourages historical novelists to be just as playful about approaching the past. And it's always been true that people have reinvented the past a bit. People have rethought old stories to reflect what they think about now. And Anne Boleyn's reputation has been rethought more times than we've had hot dinners. Was she a whore? Was she a tragic heroine? What was she? But now it seems that we've become much readier to sort of do that more quickly, to remould and rethink things. And it seems to me that the mark of a good story about the past, whether it's fact or fiction, is whether you can take one of these stories, these sets of old facts, and build them into a new interesting shape or show them in a new light. And I think that historical fiction in particular is a brilliant way of floating these new ideas, of looking at new ways of looking at the past. It's a kind of forum for creative experimenting. And it puts flesh on all these new suppositions and question marks that you can have about things, and it lets you sort of squeeze and shuffle things without forcing an issue. So you can ask a question: what would this look like if, say, the lost prince in the tower wasn't lost after all, but alive and well and living in Tudor England? What would it be like? And you can have a bit of a play with it. Rather than actually having to go so far as to say, it wasn't like that, it was like this. There he was sitting at, say, Thomas More's table in Henry VIII's reign. And so, as fiction, you can have a style of inquiry that raises questions without insisting on them. And I think that fits in really well with our generally more kind of multi-sourced, multi-everything, YouTube-ish, fragmented way of looking at things that we've learnt from electronic media. And I think historical fiction fits in really well with that, and it would be interesting to see what you think when your questions start.
Oh, that's so contentious. Great. Thank you, Venora. Okay, Kathy, introduce yourself and...
Hello. You can hear me, yes. So my name is Kathy Rensenbrink. When I was asked to be on this panel, I worked for Waterstones as publisher relationship manager, and I'm still doing it, but I now run Quick Reads, which is a literacy charity. So it's more about how we get people to read. So I'm coming at this from quite a commercial angle. Though also as a massive fan of historical fiction, and I grew up on Jean Plaidy. And one of the things I personally love about historical fiction is it just makes you seem so much cleverer than you actually are. Because I'm really good on Catherine de Medici, and people often think I must have extensively studied European history. And it's all from when I was 12 and in Snaith Library and reading Jean Plaidy books. So I'm a big fan. So what I think is interesting is that publishing is experiencing unprecedented change at the moment, and vast amounts of things are uncertain for everyone. And the reason why this is an opportunity for writers is that all the barriers are being broken down and there are many more possibilities to experiment. So I think of it like the Wild West, and some people will flourish. So one of the things that this current world offers is a real chance for people to be able to find their niche. So say 15 years ago, before digital, you might have struggled to get a publisher interested in your take on life as a blacksmith in 17th century Cheltenham, or the origins of stamp collecting, or whaling ships. But now, whatever your interest is, there will be people somewhere who are also very, very interested in this. And then, as other people have said, if you make your characters live enough, that interest could be enough to then make everybody interested in it. And I think there's many more ways of gaining momentum and support than there used to be. My second point is that everything moves so fast. So when I was first asked to talk here, when I first thought about what I would say, I wanted to talk about self-publishing and digital publishing as a route into mainstream and print success. So since then, the whole 50 Shades of Grey thing has happened. So that has actually happened to a level that I hadn't even foretold. So what was a slightly quirky idea of mine a few months ago has happened on a scale that I don't think anybody would have foreseen, which I think is it's a fortunate, positive and exciting development for people who want to write and be read. And I also, so then as soon as this happened, I then started thinking about whether historical erotica was a particular niche. And I was thinking about 50 Shades of Lady Jane Grey. And I was working out a little joke for you. But again, even that now, the whole idea of 50 Shades of Lady Jane Grey has been doing the rounds as an industry joke now for ages. You know, everybody's now made that joke on Twitter, and I said, I was saving that for the Historical Novel Society conference. but it's all gone. And then on the whole moving so fast thing, I would imagine now, I don't know, I would imagine publishers are seeing a lot of erotic historical fiction on submission. So what I'm actively not saying is don't spend the next 3 years writing 50 Shades of Lady Jane Grey, because by that time that particular boat will probably have sailed. My third point is that the Wild West, if I continue with my analogy, was a cruel as well as an exciting place. So one of the things I find fascinating about the current landscape is that it has probably never been easier to be read. So if what you care about is having your words consumed by people, then it's quite liberating, because you no longer actually need to wait for a publisher to give you permission. You can search and find a readership of your own, you can publish yourself. However, what goes along with that, it's probably never been more difficult to be paid. And what's very interesting about the modern world is that nobody's worked out how the money bit works and how the money bit is going to work. And it's sort of the big question. And I'm sure in the future it kind of will be worked out, but at the moment nobody really knows. So getting someone to pay you for consuming your words is becoming increasingly challenging. And it's very difficult for very established authors who sell large quantities of books. And a lot of people that are already very successful are being more challenged by the current situation. None of which I say to depress anyone. It's just a point, and an important point. So there's lots of interesting opportunities. And to a certain extent, nobody really has the answers, which is, depending on which way you look at it, worrying or incredibly exciting.
I give you Rory Clements.
Hello, I am writing a series of historical thrillers set in the late 16th century. I grew up on a diet of Georgette Heyer and Anya Seton, which is a very strange thing for a teenager to do, but there you go. In those days, I think historical fiction was a little bit quaint. Nowadays, I think it's pretty cool, actually, and I think a lot of that is to do with the language we use. I don't think I'm alone in shunning words like verily and thou and have it ye varlet and all those sort of things. Which makes it much more accessible, I think, to a modern audience. I've got figures here which suggest that that males make up more than 50% of historical fiction buyers. And looking at this audience, I simply, from my publisher, and I simply don't believe it looking at this audience. And I think that's a good thing, that because the point is that women and ordinary people played as much a part...
Hold for yourself there.
How do I get out of this one? If you understand what I mean, they played as large a part of they played as large a part of history as all the men of Errol Flynn types stabbing each other with swords. I mean, if you look at this late 16th century, you have a character like Elizabeth, highly educated. She wasn't the only highly educated woman at that time. There were many, many liberated, highly educated women like Lady Susan Bertie, Margaret of Cumberland, and Amelia Lanier, many of whom you heard of. And they need to be given a voice in present-day fiction, which I try and do in my fiction. If you like, it's the difference between all stories of the past of the Tudor era, all being about the court. If you look at the TV series, all about the court. Actually, there's an awful lot going on, as Sarah's saying, among ordinary people. They had great stories. There were people like us, plebs, if you like. You know, we are history, and our forebears are historical as well. And I think that makes it a great deal more accessible. I'm actually reading a fascinating book at the moment, which would make a great novel if anyone could write about it, called Women's Diaries of the Westward Journey. Has anyone ever heard it? It's extraordinary. It's all about the women who travelled west from Ohio and Missouri on the Oregon Trail. Quite remarkable tales of fortitude. And it was written by the women who travelled on it. Had no say in the matter. They didn't choose to go, but they went. So there you go. I think it's got a great future history.
Thank you. And last but not least, Carol.
Well, I feel like coming last, I could just say, yeah, I agree with all of them, but actually I do. But I grew up on a diet of Anya Seton and Jean Plaidy, and as an agent, I feel remarkably lucky to be able to work with people I choose to work with and with stories I want to work with. I didn't have a classical education. Most of the things that I've learned about history, I've learned from good historical fiction, much of it from my own authors. Several people here have said it's about story, and of course it is. Several people have said we've run out of queens. I would disagree with that, because I think that everybody that chooses to write about a king or a queen or a courtier or whomever produces a different version of that king or queen or courtier. Two of my authors who are in the audience, Barbara Erskine and Elizabeth Chadwick, have at times written about the same historical characters, and they are quite different people, because you come at it from a different viewpoint. You come at it with a different central character and a different point to make, perhaps. And I enjoy all of these, because if you think about your own circle of friends, you may have 6 people in a circle, but you'll all have slightly different version of how you think about that one person, because we all come at it from a different segment in the circle. That's a horrible mathematical phrase, which probably doesn't work. But Elizabeth Chadwick, for instance, is writing a trilogy now on Eleanor of Aquitaine. Eleanor of Aquitaine has been written about forever, but this Eleanor is going to be quite different, and I'm going to enjoy her in a different way. And I like being able to see through the eyes of writers a different version of events that I might be familiar with, or seeing a version of events that I know nothing about and learning about it. And I think that one thing I love about historical fiction is getting to the author's notes at the end and having it unpicked for me so that I know which are historical facts and which aren't, so that I don't go to a dinner party and make a complete arse of myself by pretending to know something that actually is a piece of fiction.
Great, thank you, Karen. I'd just like to throw out for any gay historical writers out there the phrase, "we're running out of queens."
Not in publishing.
Okay, you've been so brilliant, thank you. Everybody stayed really to time, which means we have 15 minutes to really get our hands dirty now. So let's have some questions. You have to wait for the mic because it's horrible in here. Where is the mic? Oh, great.
Thank you. I have a comment and a question. My comment is we can take the 50 Shades of Thomas Gray, because I was just reading this morning how Erasmus fell in love with a Scotsman, Thomas Gray, Erasmus being the great Renaissance humanist. And I was fascinated to read that. There's a letter that he wrote to him in 1497. So there is another wonderful subject. My question is that I'm an art historian, and I wonder why we can't have reproductions in historical novels, which is kind of left of center. That when I was at the British Museum had the exhibition on Shakespeare, and there was this great picture of Nonsuch Palace. And I thought, wow, that's what it looks like. I've read so much about it, and finally I get to see what it was like. And it's we're all novelists. It's people, I don't think it would confuse people about, oh, is this really history or not? And I was just wondering why we can't break the boundaries and sometimes include pictures. And
May I jump in on that? Well, can we?
Yes.
I'm going to take lots of questions so we get a feeling that. Can you hear her from the back? Yeah, fantastic. Right.
And I was also thinking of the Unknown Portrait that I love so much, and that brings to mind so many images. And again, as an art historian, you think of Holbein.
It did get published with a couple of pictures.
It did, which is what prompted my question, which I really appreciated that it did have those pictures.
Great,
so.
great. I'm going to take some more questions. Ooh, yes. Lady here and lady there, and then to the back, yeah. No, they won't hear you at the back. I'm so sorry. It's not to do with the wonder of your voice.
This question is really for Venora, but it may apply to the rest of you as well. It's about specifically, perhaps, if you think about the Queen of Silks, and how you run a protagonist who is an invented protagonist with a connection with somebody who really existed in history, alongside a protagonist who is one of the protagonists who is Richard III. And I'm curious about how you did that. I mean, how it's successful. You do it very successfully. And I think I know why. I think it's because of the writing and because of what you would call the sideways glance, really. You know, you're looking at other things and you get away with it very well. But that's quite a difficult thing to do, is to, I think, run an invented protagonist in a romance that never existed alongside a real person in history. I wonder if you could say a few words on that.
Thank you. Lady there, just... Yeah. I'm noting these down, I swear.
Okay. I just want, first of all, comment that as a historical writer, it takes a lot of time to actually get the history right, and most of us are totally obsessed with getting the history right, totally obsessed. But I just wonder, is there any research that actually would show how much sales, which is what in a sense we're all talking about, actually increases by spending ages and ages on Twitter and Facebook? And I mean, I can understand a website which people can then engage. If you look at my website, I've got pictures of East London that people can see where the book's set. But, you know, hours and hours on Twitter, hours and hours on Facebook. Is there any actual academic research or even, you know, media publishing research which shows that this actually increases sales?
Right, I'm going to take one more, then we'll have a discussion, then I'll take some more questions, I promise. Yes, lady there, thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for a panel worth getting up for. Everybody was entertaining and provocative. I'm going to try and string together a few of the things that different people have said. I took Sarah's advice. I wrote a book about a footnote from history, a black woman who became a spy during the American Civil War by pretending to be a slave in the Confederate White House. The book is published. It has the section Carol likes at the back with its historical bits and what I made up and what I didn't. But obviously on every page, it's a book about slavery that has no plantations in it, a book about the Civil War that has no battlefields in it. So there's a lot of history people don't know. And I'm thinking now about Venora's point. We live in a multimedia age. I've done work on websites and multimedia things. I would love it if rather than just having an ebook that was the text of the book, I had an ebook that was truly interactive. You know, Al Gore's book came out in a very hyper way. I know it would be hugely expensive to do that rather than just taking the files and converting them. But I'd love to hear from the folks who work in publishing. Is there potential to really make rich multimedia that will then allow us to have the pictures, the interaction, the level of history in there actually embedded into the text in a new way that print does not allow?
Great, thank you. Those are great questions. Let's address the first and the last, because they seem to go together, right? Pictures and images in books, does that make them non-fiction? Why can't they be in fiction too?
Sure, I'd love to speak to this. They can absolutely be in fiction. A lot of the times, there's a copyright issue. So whether we can or cannot reproduce it is a copyright issue. And also, it has to do with permission, which is sort of, you have to get text permission or permission to reprint it. What you're talking about may cost $10,000, and it's actually on the author to pay for it. It's not on the publishing house. We can do it against royalties.
Depends
or
on the
against
contract who've got arguing
Right.
for you.
we do
Carol
not
is
do
your
that.
agent.
Yes, this is a good negotiator over here. So yes, it really has to do with the permissions thing. So yeah, I love including photos. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it
And
just
or
technical?
paintings.
It's happening. It's not technical. You can
Yeah.
pay for these things, but it's happening. I have an example right now. I have an author called Lawrence Norfolk, who's written a novel called John Saturnale's Feast. It's set during the English Civil War. I feel very privileged with this book. It's not only bloody good, but 3 of the publishers, and I've sold it to many more than that, 3 of his publishers are so passionate about it, they have put illustrations in.
Right.
They have put different illustrations in. The English publisher Bloomsbury commissioned some exquisite lithographs, and every chapter opens with a made-up recipe, which Lawrence says has produced from the 1600s. And opposite that recipe is a whole-page illustration specific to that recipe. The American
Foodies
publishers,
in history, it's a great
absolutely,
combination.
very sensuous and sexy. The American publisher, Grove Atlantic, went one further. They published the book in 2 colours throughout, and that's actually very expensive. There's a little bit of red on every page. But he commissioned quite different illustrations. He paid $30,000 for them, so it can be done. He then, and I do want to tell you this because this man is a gentleman, he then sent all of the originals to the author as a present.
Right. Great.
The German publisher did the same with different illustrations, so it's doable.
Look, Carol is your agent. She's mentioned all of her writers in
No,
the
there's
space
more
of
to come.
40 minutes. It's been brilliant. No, for very
placement
good
rules.
reasons. For very good reasons, right. Can I very quickly address the enhanced ebook, which is what I think you're partly looking at? And I think we've got a problem here as novelists, right, which is at one level we absolutely want everybody to know the depth and wonder of what it is underneath our novels, but we don't want to destroy the suspension of disbelief during the moment of living within the writing of the novel. And I had quite a big argument with Random House in America about an enhanced ebook of Birth of Venus, because when I get the notes back, it shows all of these different places where the reader can jump out of the text to go to something that is disconnected from the emotional narrative drive that I have spent 3 years attempting to put them hermetically into. So I think we somehow have to divide out the reading experience, which is our job to plunge you viscerally into the past, and then the way that if you're interested, we give you all of the information backwards, right? Venora, would you like to address, because this addresses everybody, I think, when you have real characters and made-up characters operating together.
Oh, sorry, can I just jump in about enhanced? I just want to mention this sort of from the publishing side of things also. It doesn't necessarily make fiscal sense for us all the time to do it. It's very expensive to do it. Think what you will of George W. Bush, but when I was at Crown, we published his memoirs. We did a very incredible enhanced ebook with all sorts of extra things, family photos, video, whatever. We sold collectively like 1% of sales were that enhanced ebook. So it just, at the end of the day, sometimes it doesn't make fiscal sense
I'm
for
more
us to
impressed than ever with Americans if they didn't buy Bush's book.
No, unfortunately, Carol, they bought the book.
I
They
know.
just didn't buy the enhanced book. Right, Venora.
Okay, real and made-up characters. The characters you're talking about, just to explain to anyone who hasn't read it, it's Richard III and a mistress who is a secret mistress, but has a job. And in Plantagenet England, the merchant class were very, very important to the skint kings, and who needed the money, and they needed to go to the merchant class. And since it was a time of war, women got quite a good look in, and there were quite a lot of women pursuing an independent economic activity and being rich. Now, it seems to me that if you're going to write about a time that's as far away from modern times as the Middle Ages, they lived so differently. There's everything about the texture of their lives is really very difficult to grasp. And it's largely the number of times that people were together with other people when we would pick up the phone or put on the oven. They needed sort of 6 or 7 sort of boys or girls to move coals around, and it's I think it's so hard for us to grasp the way in which society was all meshed together then, that we have to sort of do shorthand. And my silk woman, Isabel, was a composite of lots of real silk women, all called Isabel from the 14th century. But I think that a lot of the writing about that time has to be something that you can kind of somehow bridge a gap between how you think it was then and how you think people understand things now, and have a bridge figure that is something in between. And I think the view I took of Richard III was the friendly view perpetrated by the put out. I mean, perpetrated sounds negative, doesn't it? But by the Richard III Society, and where he wasn't such a bad guy. But that's all about him being rather straightforward and down to earth, and not kingly in the sort of annoying Louis XIV kind of way, and being able to relate normally to normal people, because he spent a lot of time in inns on the road and have normal, not too grand relationships, and that this rather kind of high-powered female from the merchant class might easily have been able to do that. And so she's made up and he's not made up, but there's a lot in both of them that is made up. And that it's all a different kind of shorthand.
Thank you. Great picture of Richard III as Prince Harry there, getting on with ordinary people. Thank you, Venora. Look, we've got 5 minutes, but I'm going to take 10 because you were all late and there's lots of questions. Gentleman from the back, then the lady there. Yeah. Wait for your microphone. The Twitter. Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, it's because I hate Twitter. Yeah, just
Yes.
sorry, just wait a minute. Just let's crush Twitter.
We're going to talk about whether or not there's any evidence that spending lots of
thank
time
you.
on Twitter and Facebook increases your sales. I'm very happy to talk about this because I think it's fascinating. Nobody agrees about this, and I've got an example on both of my sides, because you were talking about building a platform, and Sarah feels that it's a terrible mistake. So basically, the great thing about this is a bit like I said, nobody knows the answer to lots of things at the moment. Nobody knows the answer. So on the one hand, if you engage with Twitter and Facebook, you might either not like it, in which case you shouldn't do it. You might do it badly, in which case you'll annoy every possible contact that you might know. Or you might love it so much that you never write another sentence of your novel because you spend your life on Twitter. On the other hand, you might be able to exercise sufficient control and tact to do it brilliantly, and it will open up another whole world of opportunity and possibility to you and be very, very exciting. That all those possibilities exist on a spectrum, and you can only yourself decide what you're going to do. But I certainly feel you have to be very, very sure of yourself to neglect it as something that you need to engage with, but you also need to be very careful, because whilst it looks very simple, it's quite easy to get it wrong.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, I want to add to that really quickly and just say that I wasn't saying you have to do all of these things, but I do feel that you need to be out there wherever you feel you can be your most authentic self. And that isn't, buy my book is great. That's, give us more. Sorry, Sarah.
We need another panel. We need another hour and a half to discuss this.
No, but it's to do with whether or not writers are more authentic when they're writing, as opposed to talking about it. And the notion that you should start social networking before you finish writing the book would be a disaster, because the different sides of your brain that you use within sinking into painful and difficult creative questions and then spinning yourself are so far one from the other.
I'm sorry,
Go for me.
As an editor, when I receive a manuscript and I see that author, I am going on Facebook and I'm seeing how many friends they have and how many followers they have. I mean,
You'd never buy me.
But the thing is, if I absolutely fall in love with the book, I'm going to fall in, whether I fall in love with the book and that's why I want to buy it, okay? However, if I fall in love with the book and then I see you have all of these followers and you're very engaged, I can go to my marketing department and say, look, I need more money into my profits and losses statement. Like, I need to be able to, it actually increases your chance of getting a higher advance, to be perfectly honest. From a publishing
And also,
side.
I found a client on Twitter, and she's been a very, very successful debut author.
God. All right.
It's a fact.
And you in the third row yelling, yes, yes. You can talk to them later, all right, okay? Gentleman at the back.
That's fine, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yell.
I belong to a group run by WordPress, and I have blogged. And in that 1 week, I had 5,000 hits.
Right.
Now, it doesn't mean 5,000 readers. It gets my name out there, and who knows, 1 or 2 people might buy the book.
All right. Have you finished writing, or are you trying to... Great. Thank you. That was part of my point. Gentleman at the back, how patient you've been, sir.
Well, of course. True gentleman. This is not a technology question or observation. You'd be glad to hear. As a wannabe author who's gay, by the way, I was really pleased to hear there aren't enough queens about.
Did you say an Edwardian author who's gay?
I'm a wannabe author who's gay,
right.
And I'm glad to hear that there are too few queens.
Yeah.
However, I would actually argue that there are too many. I love reading that sort of historical fiction, but we've got kings and queens and dukes and duchesses and generals coming out of our ears, if you pardon the expression. And I hope you'll forgive me for saying so. I'm much more interested in the stable boys, actually. Well, you understand what I mean, I hope.
Are you sure you want to go on?
I'm committed now. I can't wriggle out of this. On a serious point, particularly in these egalitarian days, surely we ought to be writing a lot more bottom-up rather than top-down. I really didn't mean to say that. We should be looking at it from the point of view of the lower classes more. I'm not a social revolutionary, but I think there's a great deal more scope for taking that perspective in historical fiction.
Right. Thank you very much. No more queens, more bottoms. Right, that's clearly what we've got from that. Couple more, please, and then we'll...
Oh, hello. I would like to ask about the direction of historical fiction in terms of writing for young adults. I write historical fiction for young adults, and I've had a small amount of success with my first published work. And since my book came out, I've noticed that a couple of rather well-known novels who write historical fiction for adults have dipped their toe into the young adult market with, I believe, from my many signings at Waterstones and much chatting to Waterstones booksellers, with mixed success for these big names. So I just wonder, do you think that's an opportunity? What do you think the difficulties are? Where do you think it's going?
Great question, thank you. Lady there. Yes. Go on, go on. Go on, Jenny.
I wanted to talk about the ebook question because this is actually one of the reasons I came here. I'm working on a series of historical novels set in a very transitional period between the American Revolution and the French Revolution, and the characters in it all become part of a merchant society which goes all over the world, so it's got a lot of...
I want to read it already.
But I was thinking I still need to visit some of these places, particularly in Morocco and northern Africa in general. And I was thinking about putting something on Kickstarter for it to try and raise a little money to go there, since I'm funding it all myself. And I went and looked at other things, you know, into how many novels are on there and so on. And almost no straight novels were there. But there were lots and lots of really exciting kind of ebook type projects. And I said, well, really, you know, we're being extremely limited in the use of the technology. This is very exciting technology, and it really opens up enormous possibilities for books, which had never been there before. And we're not using it. I couldn't find any platform that would really let me put in the enormous amount of research that I've done. And I thought, well, this should really be my Kickstarter project, to start an ebook platform, just as an app maybe for iPad, and to put in it my research and invite other novelists and historians to put in their research as an open source project that would be the sort of the back end of it, which the novels could then hook into.
Right.
And they could do it in such a way that it would be very streamlined, so that you could have it just read it as a straight book.
So novelists would create their own data source, which other novelists could use too, not just other novelists, but there. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And then they could just turn on this application, so that then they could look up all these things, but not be taken out of the story.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more question. You had your hand up first, so it's got to be you. I'm so sorry. It's just...
Since there are those of us represented from both sides of the pond, and I was interested in hearing things yesterday about different types of historical fiction. We heard a lot about, oh God, I don't want to see any more Roman fiction. In the US, there isn't any Roman fiction, and here there seems to be a glut of it. I wonder if historical fiction is going in two different directions depending on which side of the pond you're on, and what this new revolution means for both sides of the pond, or how the new revolution is affecting both sides of the pond, or whether it's the same revolution.
Great. Thank you. Let's end with that. Young adults, please. Yeah, writing...
I know zilch about young adults. Books or people, sorry.
I can make a comment about young adult. The point is, I think that the young adult market for print books is in general buoyant. The idea is that group of people are buying lots of books, so therefore that's where the attraction is, and then so therefore will they also buy historical fiction, which I think they will. And actually, so many of us, I bet if we could go around the room, I bet we all, as I've said, I bet we all learned to love. I bet we were all reading young adult before we knew that it was young adult. So in the way that we were consuming Jean Plaidy and Georgette Heyer, we were reading it as young adults. So in that sense, I think yes. And then I think as well for big brand authors. So actually, Johnny Geller, who's an agent who's very active on Twitter, said on Twitter yesterday that whenever he uses brand in conjunction to the word author, he always feels a little bit of himself dies. So I've just done it. But for big brand authors, again, everybody's interested in thinking how those people can explore their brand and increase their brand. So people are trying things, and in some cases it works very well, and in some cases it will work less well. That's back to that Wild West thing. Some of it will work, some of it less so.
Okay. And have we got the same revolution both sides of the Atlantic?
Well, I mean, I think I sort of spoke to what's going on in the US already.
You're glutting on kings and queens.
Yeah, exactly. But yes.
But emperors...
But also, don't forget, every time somebody generalises, you kill another truth. I mean, if you drill down, there will be some Roman fiction available in America and being written.
How is Robert Harris, for instance, in his Cicero
series? It may not be
series.
the most popular books or the most evident, but there's something for everybody everywhere, and just different things rise to the surface at different times.
Yeah. And just further to that, it's not that I don't ever want to publish a king or a queen again. If I fell in love with a novel, I would absolutely publish it. My point is, when we have 4 books about Anne Boleyn on our list, do I really feel like I need to buy another one? It's not fair for those 4 novelists, and it's not fair for you to try and break you out when we already have these novelists on our list. So.
Thank you very much. It seems to me there's a very simple thing to say at the end of this, and it's the same thing that's said at the end of every single panel like this, isn't it? If you write the book that stirs your passion, she will represent you and she will buy it, right? But
Okay,
really,
Heather,
if
it's
you
you.
are thinking of twittering and what the market has to say, and you haven't done your research because you're going to have to live with it for a year and a half, and you do not feel it is more important to you than your husband, wife, or children some of the time, forget it. All right? Thank you so much. You're a great audience.
Thank you so much. That's a fantastic, energizing panel, which is exactly what we needed this morning.
First thing in the morning.